Welcome to Blueprint for Health and Healing, Reversing Disease from its Foundation. Hi, I'm Dr. John Clark, and today's topic is winning over Parkinson's. A lot of people don't realize the impact that Parkinson's has on society. It's a very disabling disease. Common symptoms include tremor of the hands, legs, or arms, or jaw. That's what you usually notice about these people. They're also very rigid or stiff in the limbs. One of the tests for Parkinson's is to take somebody's arm who is suspected of having it and seeing if you can pull it out straight. If they have it, they often resist in sort of what we call a cogwheel rigidity. There's slowness of movement. And not only are they slow, but they're not very stable. In fact, they tend to fall over, especially backwards. And if they hit their head, it doesn't help the problem. Parkinson's shares with many other dementias, psychosis, anxiety, insomnia, autonomic dysfunction, and mood disturbances. And a lot of these people get very depressed. I guess I would be depressed too if I had Parkinson's. And over 1 million individuals in the United States have this disease. It's the second most common neurodegenerative disease next to Alzheimer's. It usually comes on between age 55 and 66. Now, Parkinson's disease is the result of a loss of certain neurons in the brain, neurons that you need. What kills these neurons is usually free radicals. This is inflammation, this is oxidative stress, and these neurons then, when they're dead, they can't act to help you. So really, the best thing you can do in prevention is eat lots of antioxidants. Now here's a picture of the brain and sort of a slice through the brain. And if you look closely, you can see some of the brain is colored blue. We call those nuclei. And some of those nuclei are very important to helping you so you don't get Parkinson's. Substantia nigra, you see down there at the bottom, that's a very important one. And then off to the right-hand side is one labeled globus pallidus. Here's the way it works. One nucleus is there to make you go, to get you started, to initiate movement. The other nucleus is to slow you down, stop you, keep you from going too fast. What happens in Parkinson's is the go nucleus burns out and the stop nucleus is too overactive. So you've always got the brakes on. What we need to do is stimulate that go nucleus so it regrows, so it becomes active again. There's a number of risk factors for Parkinson's. Notice that smoking tops the list. Then we have drinking. I mean, these are habits that a lot of people don't realize cause these problems. I suppose if they did when they were younger, they would be less likely to continue it. Other diseases like diabetes, depression, and stroke can lead to Parkinson's, heart disease, and high blood pressure. High blood pressure doesn't help the brain, that's for sure. Now, Parkinson's risk rises with the number of years of tobacco use. So quitting has its benefits, and the longer it's been since you smoked, the lower the risk of some of these diseases. Now, if you were to think about Parkinson's in terms of your brain, one of the things your brain does is thinks. And one of the things that your brain thinks about often is worry, stress, things that might happen. People with more anxiety are definitely at a higher risk of Parkinson's. I had an attending physician when I was in training who was a specialist in Parkinson's. And he did wonders for Parkinson's. But one of the things he did was he evaluated a very famous person in the United States that was known for his Parkinson's. This famous person was always thought to get his Parkinson's because he was a boxer. But our attending said no, that's probably not because he was a boxer. He was a good boxer and probably his opponents took more hits than he did. But the reason that he came down with Parkinson's was due to stress arising out of conflicts between his partner, his spouse, and his manager for his boxing career. And so anxiety raises the stress hormones in your brain, such as cortisol. Anxiety raises the inflammation in the brain. What if I take anxiety pills? Would that help? Actually, anxiety pills just sort of tie up your brain so it can't respond to the anxiety-producing stimuli. So what happens is your risk of Parkinson's goes up another 10%. Well, let's talk a little bit more about mental stress, psychological stress. It leads to neuroinflammation. That's when there's a lot more bad things happening in the brain. Temperature of the brain goes up. Cytokines of inflammation start floating around. You start getting holes in your blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is there to keep bad things from happening to your brain. And so the psychological stress really makes your brain very vulnerable to a neurodegenerative disease, and thus increasing Parkinson's. Now, I want to talk about a protein that's associated with Parkinson's. In this series, we talk about Alzheimer's, and we talk about beta amyloid. That's the protein associated with Alzheimer's. But if we look at Parkinson's, it's a different type of protein, a different protein called alpha-synuclein. Alpha-synuclein comes from an interesting place. It can come from meat, especially cows, chickens, and pigs. And this thing is scary. I think it's a bit like mad cow disease, only this one, you eat this food, and this alpha-synuclein literally crawls its way up your nerves from your intestines to your brain. That should send shivers up your back, or hopefully not alpha-synuclein up your back. It's a bit like prions, and so we worry about this one, and well, we should, and we'll talk about this more in terms of preventing its progression. Consumption of dairy products, especially milk, has been linked to an 80% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. In men that consumed almost 3 servings of dairy products per day, compared to those only eating 1 serving per day. So milk is part of the problem. You know, you can get mad cow disease from milk. Mothers breastfeeding their babies who had mad cow disease passed it on to their babies. And so it shouldn't be any surprise that something like alpha-synuclein could also be in this product. Now, what about fats? What about oils? What about margarine? You see, when you eat high-fat foods, it cuts down the oxygen in your bloodstream. It reduces the amount of oxygen that can actually make it to your brain. This isn't going to help because you need oxygen for the metabolism in your brain to help fight inflammation. So eliminating all refined oils, bottled oils from your diet is going to be very helpful. And there's other foods that aren't helpful, as peanut butter, which often has mold in it, and fried foods, where the oils have undergone heat degradation and have high levels of, oxidized lipids. Now, let's think about this shaking business. Parkinson's is classically identified or associated with shaking. And did you know that vinegar promotes trembling of the nerves and shaking? We're talking vinegar like comes in bottles, and people think they have to drink it for a health tonic, such as apple cider vinegar and that kind of thing. I tell people, well, why don't you just be more natural and eat the rotten apples? Well, I haven't gotten any takers on that yet. They prefer the rotten apple juice. It sort of obscures where the product came from, and reminds me of children who buy milk in the store never realizing it came from a cow. Well, this stuff comes from somewhere. And another thing that isn't helpful is fungicides. Oh, it's a bad thing to be a grape grower and have some grapes come to the supermarket and be all moldy. So they spray them down with fungicides. And these fungicides are a risk factor for developing Parkinson's. There's a lot of chemicals in the etiology, the origins of Parkinson's. So we'll come back to more of those. One of them we might think of as sugar or refined carbohydrates. You didn't think of that as being quite like pyrethrin or anything, but it sort of is. And so Parkinson's patients tend to eat fewer antioxidants and a diet much higher in refined carbohydrates and sugars. Interesting to go and look at people who have a certain disease and then watch what they eat. You know you are what you eat, at least you're made up of what you eat. And so if you don't like what you are, how about trying changing what you eat? Sort of makes sense, doesn't it? And so here we have that Parkinson's patients are eating things that are making them what they are. And so refined carbohydrates, sugars, other things that are especially problematic are trans fats. What is trans fat? Well, in the fat world, which is triglycerides, you have long-chain fatty acids. Those fatty acids come in different varieties. There's either saturated ones, meaning they have no double bonds, or there's monounsaturated ones, which means they have one double bond, or polyunsaturated, which means they have multiple double bonds. When they take these oils, such as even olive oil or corn oil or canola oil, and they hydrogenate it or partially hydrogenate it for making margarine, you end up with some of those double bonds that get hydrogenated one way and some the other way. The ones that get hydrogenated crisscross are trans fats. It's really a product of hydrogenation. This can also happen in heating oils, like as in frying something. If you want to make some trans fat at home, just put any oil in a pan, heat it up till it's sizzling hot, and you'll be making trans fat. In New York City, they decided to outlaw trans fat. Good luck. They might have brought some very good oil into town and put it in the fryers, but one frying of anything and the whole vat is going to be full of trans fat. And so this is an issue. And these Parkinson's patients, they don't eat enough fiber. Fiber is so healthy for you. It keeps you regular. It feeds the bacteria in your gut that are responsible for a lot of your good health. And fiber is also very important at keeping your blood sugars from going too high. Another thing that these people aren't eating enough of is folate. Where would you get folate? Green leafy vegetables. So they're eating a lot of refined carbohydrates as pictured here in the picture and not getting their green leafy vegetables. And then they eat a lot of unsaturated fats. Where do those come from? Animals. And coconut oil. Oh, yeah, coconut oil actually has more I should say that they don't eat enough unsaturated fat, therefore they're eating too much saturated fat. And so, yeah, they eat coconut oil, and coconut oil has more saturated fat than does lard. And then there's protein and fat. These folks just aren't on a good diet. Therefore, they aren't in good health. They are what they eat, and they're not eating good stuff, so I guess they're not good stuff. All right, let's talk about a food additive that is very dangerous to the brain. Any neurodegenerative disease, any problem with the brain, and you can look to this chemical. And if you suffer a brain injury such as closed head trauma from an accident, or you get a stroke, this will be the thing you want to avoid if you want to recover. And this is MSG, monosodium glutamate. Monosodium glutamate will give you all kinds of problems. It increases neuroinflammation. It oversights the neurons to the point of death. And they hide it in a lot of foods. And so we really want to eliminate this from the diet as much as possible. And there's high levels of this in many products. And I just want to mention a few of those products. Any protein that starts out that a large percentage of it is glutamate, and then it is highly processed, we'll end up with a lot of free glutamate. Pea protein, about 20% of pea protein or soy protein is glutamate. And so if you make it into Bragg's liquid amino soy sauce, soy protein isolate, sports protein drinks, whatever, you got 20% free glutamate. You got 20% monosodium glutamate. And this is going to give your brain a punch that it just really doesn't need, and you'll end up with neuronal damage. It also stimulates cancer to grow. So this is scary, but let's get back to Parkinson's. In people with Parkinson's disease, there may be an enhanced uptake of glutamate. Now there's a couple other free amino acids that aren't helpful. Aspartate, as found in NutraSweet, and also glycine, as found in a herbicide Roundup, or otherwise known as glyphosate. And so these will all be a part of the neurotoxicity, it's been called excitotoxins. So you want to avoid aspartate, you want to avoid glutamate, it's often in foods you don't recognize. If you go to a fast food restaurant, if they don't have glutamate stuck on everything, they're probably not going to be in business for long. It's what gives everything a super flavor. Personally, I get a bit of a headache if I get very much of this, and anytime I've gone out to eat, a vast majority of any fast food restaurants, I find I've got a reaction. And so I've learned to pick through what to get at some of these places to avoid it, but it is added everywhere. So you want to avoid Parkinson's? Well, how would I find out where the glutamate is? Oh, go to the internet and study it. There's a good website, truthinlabeling.org, a lady whose husband died of glutamate toxicity, and she learned to find where it was and where you might encounter it. MSG is hidden under a lot of names. Now, chance finding, living near a swamp. Well, if you have a lot of water around your house, you're probably going to have a lot of mold in your house. You have a lot of mold in your house, your risk of Parkinson's goes up. By how much? 7.5 times. That's significant. And so you're much better having your house on a hill away from water sources, so where it's dry, where there's good ventilation. You want to have it so there's not too many trees too tight around your house. Those will impact whether or not you have mold or aflatoxins in the air. And where you live affects how your health is, affects your risk of Parkinson's. Many people don't realize this. And it's environment that gets them. And so beware of the environmental problems. There's also other things besides mold, which is fungi, involved in Parkinson's. There's certain bacteria, certain viruses. Here I have a picture of kimchi. Why do I have a picture of kimchi? Well, a bunch of the Koreans decided to stick some kimchi in their PCR machines. You know, the stuff, the machines that were used to diagnose COVID in many cases. And when they stuck kimchi in the PCR machine, which identifies certain DNA sequences, they discovered in their jar of kimchi that they tested 69,000 previously unidentified viral particles of DNA. And they're like, wow, what's in here? See, when things start fermenting, it's not just bacteria, it's not just fungi. There's tons of viruses which just in the last few years have come to light. Some of these viruses coded for antibiotic resistance. Some of them were dangerous coding for plasmids that would cause E. coli to become very dangerous. I mean, when you eat something rotten, what are you thinking? And so, yeah, fungi, bacteria, and viruses can all be involved in Parkinson's. And so I guess know your bugs, huh? Are cities helpful for Parkinson's? If I want to avoid Parkinson's, should I live in city or out in the country? Out in the country. the risk of Parkinson's doubles going to the city. It's the stress, it's the urban environment, it's all these stresses, it's all these toxins, it's the life, it's the lights at night, there's all kinds of things in a city that just aren't helpful. And now what about pesticides, heavy metals and solvents? The modern environmental exposure to these things definitely puts our brains at risk. Roundup, I say here Roundup Ready Parkinson's. Roundup is a popular, ubiquitous herbicide. I mean, everybody in the world has some of it in their body. And it's very dangerous. Causes cancer, causes kidney failure, causes Parkinson's, causes Alzheimer's, depression, infertility. It's genotoxic. And people just walk around willy-nilly. Here's a guy with short sleeves and short pants, and he's walking forward. He sprays, and then he walks through where he sprayed. And I've had people call me up. Oh, Dr. Clark, my kidneys are failing. I said, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work for whatever place doing landscaping and yard work. And I said, do you ever spray a glyphosate? I do it all the time. I says, get a new job if you want to save your kidneys, because this is not going to be good. It's not going to be easy. There's countries that have banned this stuff just due to its impact on kidneys. But I'm here to say it causes Parkinson's as well. The connection between Parkinson's and chemicals is stronger than in some of the other neurodegenerative diseases. Perhaps if you're getting neurodegenerative diseases and part of your insult is exposure to chemicals, the one that you'll get is Parkinson's rather than maybe Alzheimer's or something else. So, what about electromagnetic fields? You know, the cell phone thing. Well, radio frequencies emitted by these things cause an increase in reactive oxygen species. And these are part of the neurodegenerative process. And so a cell phone can give you a higher risk of Parkinson's. This is a bit disturbing since everybody has them and they're becoming more and more necessary. And of course, when you get Parkinson's, you'll be shaky and you won't be able to hold that thing to your head anymore. But anyway, let's talk about traumatic brain injury, football injuries, you know, the loss of consciousness due to getting hit on the head. Yeah, the more times that happens, the higher your risk of Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases. You can't be beating on that thing above your shoulders if you want it to stay around. And so these guys are wearing helmets. Does that help? Well, it's, you know, you wouldn't want to be without one of those helmets, but it's not a foolproof protection for sure. Now let's talk about prevention. There's enough about, you know, all this stuff that's causing it. Or really, and I mentioned this earlier, you want to eat a lot more fresh fruits and vegetables. That's where you're going to get your antioxidants. You don't get it from pills. During some of these pandemics, some of the universities decided to study all the vitamin pills on the market that claim to have high levels of antioxidants. At the end of the studies, the outcome was dismal. Very few of these pills had any antioxidant potential whatsoever. You got to eat your food fresh. There's nothing fresh in a pill. And so this requires you to have a good source of fresh fruits and vegetables. Where would that be? Oh, your garden. Oh, if I don't have a garden. The local farmer's market. Well, what if there's no local farmer's market? Well, then you can start looking for organic produce. What if there's no organic produce? Then pray over the produce you do get, because it's going to be a lot better than all the processed food in that supermarket, which was made out of that produce and concentrated anything that was in the produce. So, yeah, and so in looking at the foods, some of the vitamins you want to concentrate on are vitamin C, it's antioxidant. Vitamins B6 and B12 are definitely important for the brain and maintaining good brain function. And then there's folate. Notice I didn't say folic acid. Folic acid is the vitamin pill people's substitute for folate. If you looked at their actual chemical names, you would know they aren't even related to each other. Folic acid is more related to Roundup than it is to folate. It just so happens that if you take folic acid, it makes your body produce some folate. But anyway, so where do you get folate? Spinach, greens, things like that. And so this is where you want to concentrate. So let's just spend a little time with preventing Parkinson's. And I have two columns here. One will be reducing Parkinson's, and one will be increasing Parkinson's. So to reduce it, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, nuts, especially things like walnuts, seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, that kind of thing, chia seeds, flaxseed, fresh herbs, and we're talking things like cilantro and parsley and that kind of thing. Spices, there's certain spices that are good, certain spices that are bad. The good ones would be turmeric, ginger, pepper. I'm not talking hot pepper, I'm talking like paprika. And then cloves. Foods high in vitamin A and E, such as your carrots and wheat germ and things like that. And then, excuse me, a certain herb which is helpful would be ginkgo biloba. And you can usually find ginkgo biloba in health food stores or online, or you can grow it. We got some growing in our herb garden, and use it regularly. And this can be helpful for reducing Parkinson's. Now, what increases Parkinson's? And I want to just go down this list here. And that would be, yogurt, cheese. So we're talking fermented things. Ice cream. Ice cream has high levels of free radical cholesterol, oxidized cholesterol. Your brain is largely cholesterol. That means a lot of the cholesterol you might eat would go to your brain. If it's oxidized, it's going to punch holes in your blood-brain barrier. Beef, pork, and chicken because of the alpha-synuclein. The fried foods, the sodas, especially the diet, but even the non-diet because of the high fructose, which raises inflammation in your body. Canned fruits and vegetables have been identified. This could possibly be due to the linings of those cans or tins that is loaded with BPA. And so these are things that increase Parkinson's. Now, I mentioned walnuts in that first column there, and walnuts have neuroprotective effects, perhaps through omega-3s and other things, fat-soluble vitamins. So eating walnuts, some people think, because it looks like a brain, it's good for the brain. Well, I'll go with that. I don't think that's necessarily a way of picking out a food. I mean, what would I eat for my big toe? Maybe a carrot? Well, it's not going to be just because it looks like it all the time that it is for it, but if it does work that way for a good memory peg or mnemonic to remember what good foods might be helpful, then use it. Velvet beans. What are velvet beans? Velvet beans are in a family of beans that are helpful, including fava beans and lima beans. They are good beans that have especially high levels of amino acids and nutrients that are precursors to neurotransmitters. In other words, eating this bean will give your brain the food it needs to make good dopamine and serotonin and so forth. And so be aware that there are foods that are helpful, and this family of beans would be a good one to eat as opposed to other sources of protein. Beans are good sources of protein, so you don't need beef and chicken and pork that have the alpha-synuclein. There's not going to be any alpha-synuclein in these types of beans. We grew some velvet beans in our garden the last couple of years, and they're about like fava beans, and so be aware of that. Gotcha cola. And here we have it pictured, and it's very neuroprotective. It helps with different autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases typically have a lot of inflammation associated with them. Parkinson's has a lot of inflammation associated with it. And so gotcha cola is a very good herb. You can grow it, you can get it dried, you can make it into tea. I suggest you take your herbs as tea that you make rather than as capsules or tablets, but because if you take a capsule, it basically leaves your stomach to try to make tea out of it. And your stomach isn't real good about making tea out of it, especially if you aren't keeping well hydrated. Better to make the tea outside your body, and then you will absorb it and its medicinal properties much better. Turmeric is very anti-inflammatory, very neuroprotective. It's got curcumin in it that is known to be of great benefit, and so we suggest people get their turmeric. Some people will take a tablespoon a day of it just by itself. Other people like to put it in their sauces, their gravies, their salad dressings, their other foods. Some people sprinkle it on a salad. It's very good, and if you can get it fresh, raw, you know, the root looks a lot like ginger, so much the better. Or make tea out of it if you like. But if you can't get the fresh root, the raw stuff, then you certainly go for the spiced variety that you can buy in most supermarkets. Certain foods are very good for helping you fight neurodegenerative diseases, and berries, they're very high in antioxidants, and so blackberries, citrus, mulberries, pictured here in different color varieties. It's interesting because mulberries, there's a lot of benefits to mulberries, and if you're having trouble with your melatonin, mulberry leaf tea will give you some of that. So it's an interesting plant and interesting uses in health. Vegetables and nuts. Higher intakes of vegetables and nuts, according to one study, was associated with a lower risk of Parkinson's for high levels of vegetable intake, 28% lower risk for high levels of nut intake. It was 31%. And what kind of nuts would be the best? Well, pictured here. I mean, if you bought them and cracked them, you'd certainly know what they were like, but you don't want the deep fat fried salted ones so much because those extra oils are going to be oxidized. That heating process will actually make trans fat in the fat of the nut, and so you're better off eating the nuts as close to natural as possible, at least if we're talking Parkinson's, and avoiding it or trying to get over it. Now Parkinson's, I want to get back to this alpha-synuclein because it's going to be in meat, it's not going to be in vegetables. And so getting your food largely from the vegetable kingdom is going to help you avoid this, just like it would help you avoid mad cow disease or things like that. So vegetarian diet. So if you have somebody you suspect of having Parkinson's, or you know it runs in the family and you want to avoid it, you sort of have a good idea where you could make choices. And just every time you have a meal and you have a choice to make, the more times you can choose for good fresh fruits and vegetables, or the larger portion of that meal that can be fresh fruits and vegetables, just consider that you're doing yourself a favor. And yeah, an apple a day, what's it do? Keeps the doctor away, keeps Parkinson's away too. I mean, there's no alpha-synuclein in an apple, and what happens with the apple is once you eat it, then it helps to fight against this alpha-synuclein. Production of alpha-synuclein is downregulated by apple products, and so products we mean like applesauce and fresh apples. I would go for the fresh apples, but olives also show great promise in doing the same thing. And we're talking the black olives or green ripe olives, not the Calamenti olives, those other olives are all fermented, and fermentation is not going to be a great benefit for your brain. Fermentation didn't come into our world till after sin. And so if fermentation was good for you, you owe a debt of gratitude to sin for putting it in our world. Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? So we're not going to offer any debt of gratitude to sin for bringing us fermented food. Neither are we going to eat fermented food. Much better to eat fresh stuff. Onions, they have quercetin. They also have NAC, N-acetylcysteine. And these are also helpful at decreasing alpha-synuclein. So think of onions as superfood for Parkinson's, and I'm thinking, what other things have quercetin, well, the apples we just mentioned, and also green leafy vegetables, which we mentioned earlier. So all good foods for fighting Parkinson's. Now, I've titled this slide, The Will to Live. There's a lot to do with whether you have willpower or not and disease. There's a huge risk for people who have no willpower of getting any kind of disease. By the same token, with a good lot of willpower, you can almost throw off a disease. And so in Parkinson's, there's an inability to put the decision to start moving into action. And they'll often sit there at their walker and they'll be like, I can't get going. I can't get going. And if somebody comes along and gives their leg a kick and gets it started, they can get moving. Well, it's the will, putting the will into action. And so practicing having good willpower can be beneficial. People with poor willpower are inhibited, depressed, more emotional. They have lots of somatic complaints, and they're not achievement-oriented, and they suffer significantly higher Parkinson's rates. Really, it's about willing yourself out of disease, not allowing that to take you over, both in the decisions you make with your will and your refusal to be sick. Some people are just sick because they need the attention. You meet them, you say, hey, how you doing? And they give you an organ recital. Not on the keyboard. It's about their organs. Oh, my heart, my liver, my stomach. And you know, they might be setting themselves up for some of the diseases that prey upon those who don't have the will to avoid them. That's an interesting concept, and we'll pursue it further in other lectures, but the will to live is, people who don't want to live die of all kinds of things. I've met people and they say, oh, I'm just whiling away the time here waiting to die. You think they're going to live a long time? No, and this has to do with the whole idea that people who retire early and they go home and they sit on the couch and in 2 years they're dead. Men who had a great purpose in life and worked in industry and punched a clock or lived on a salary and worked hard to see the company succeed, and then they go home and, well, there's nothing to do and why live? And so the will to live is very important for Parkinson's. All right, what about Parkinson's in a schedule? All the neurodegenerative diseases are greatly improved by being on a good schedule. You know that soybeans run on a schedule? A bunch of scientists took a patch of soybeans, they took a bright light and shined it on the soybeans in the middle of the night, actually 3 a.m., and a very dark part of the night. And the soybeans, which follow the sun with their leaves, turn their leaves up to take the benefit from this high-intensity light that was shined on them. Well, for the next week, the scientists came out and they looked at their patch of soybeans. And every day at 3 a.m., those soybeans turned their leaves, right on time, right on the clock. Soybeans run on clocks, and so do we. And your brain especially. And your clock, circadian rhythms, of which there's more than one, and your brain are all up there. And so you want to make sure and have those clocks all set and running. How do I set my clock in my brain? Eat at the same time every day. Sleep at the same time every day. In other words, go to bed and get up at the same times every day. People who do that have longer life, less diabetes, cancer, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases. Being on time is beneficial. Now, let's think more about diet. Diets high in animal fat or cholesterol are especially associated with Parkinson's. We learn this by looking at whole nations of people, big people groups. People groups around the world who are less likely to get Parkinson's are the vegan groups or quasi-vegan, such as sub-Sahara blacks, rural Chinese, the Japanese. They enjoy much lower rates of Parkinson's, and they eat far fewer dead animals. And so this is a clue to how to avoid Parkinson's. As with Alzheimer's, as we mentioned in our talk on this series in Alzheimer's, caloric restriction helps save your brain. Overeating is going to make a lot more free radicals that will impact or attack your brain. And so only eating as much food as you need is very key to being healthy. And this takes a bit of self-control, takes a bit of sort of trial and error. And you sort of learn by keeping track of what you eat and how you feel. If you eat something and then you don't feel too good, write it down. Think about it. Keep it in your memory. Okay, if I eat that combination or that particular food, I don't feel so good. I don't think so well. I don't act so well. Yeah, and so just keeping track of this, you become your own scientist to regulate your own diet. Your body is a little bit different than everybody else's. And so you want to learn its particular needs and quirks and dietary choices. So Parkinson's disease is benefited by not overeating. There's another factor to Parkinson's that's even more prominent than it is in other neurodegenerative diseases, and that is whether or not you are dehydrated. Parkinson's patients tend not to feel thirsty, even 20 years before they come down with their disease. They're classically constipated and dehydrated. Constipation goes right along with dehydration. A lot of people who are constipated, if they would just drink more water, would get over that problem. And so when I read this study, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Don't drink enough water, the brain, your brain shrinks when you're dehydrated all the time. Voila, there we go. And so we end up with Parkinson's. Now the microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, have a lot to do with your brain. There's this brain-gut connection. Low fiber diets favor pathogenic bacteria as opposed to healthy bacteria, increasing the liability for Parkinson's. So eat more fiber. If your breakfast looked like this bowl, that's kind of like what our breakfast looked like this morning. Lots of fruit, some grains, and yeah, if your breakfast looks like that with lots of fiber, fresh fruit, well-cooked grains, and a little dried fruit, that's very beneficial for fighting off Parkinson's. Fiber tends to make the bacteria happy. That's what they live on. That's their food. And so this will be something that will make you healthy. Parkinson's patients, on average, when looked at in big studies, don't eat enough fruit and fiber. And so you could probably go through the community and figure out who's going to get Parkinson's by what they're eating. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, and you can actually predict how many strokes there's going to be in a town by how many fast food restaurants there are. It's very predictable. And the more fast food restaurants, the hospital better be ready for more strokes. And so they can be well advised on that. Now we've talked about food, let's talk about fresh air and natural environments. You need fresh air. Can you get fresh air inside your house? Well, if you open some windows. But most of the time the air in your house is polluted with toxins from your carpets, your drapes, your insulation boards, and your walls, from dust in the corners of the house or stuck in the carpet. There's all kinds of things to make your air not fresh. In cities, the air isn't fresh. You can't get fresh air in the city. They took a bunch of teenagers in high school in New York City. They put toxin sensors on them and sent them home. Over the weekend, they came back, and anywhere they were in the city, the toxic levels of exhaust and particulate matter and chemicals was 1 to 3 times toxic level. Inside was worse. And so you want to get outdoors, you want to get out of the city, you want to be in a green environment, natural environment. Plants help to clean up the air. I stayed in a motel not too long ago. People were nice to me and put me up in what they figured was a very nice motel, and I walked in there and I'm looking and the windows were solid glass. They didn't open. I'm thinking there's not going to be any fresh air in here. And they've done so much to put me in this nice hotel, and yet how old is this hotel? And how long has it been since the fresh air was captured in there when the thing was built? And how old is the air in this room? And I looked up and down the hall, and it's a very long hall, and there are no windows, and I'm thinking, there's no fresh air in here. What am I going to do to keep from dying in here? Well, I went to the internet. I looked up NASA's list of the best fresh air producing plants. It so happened at the top of the list for getting rid of the most toxins and helping the most were chrysanthemums. I walked over to the local garden center. I picked up 4 pots of mums and I put them in my window. And I could start smelling the improvement. And I watered those things every day. And when I left, I gave them as a present to the hosts as a, you know, a gift. And they were happy to get them. But I grew my own fresh air in my house. There's a lot of plants that you can look up that'll do that for you. The more metabolically active they are, the better. Certain ones aren't going to be as helpful, like tomato plants, because of some of the things those plants put off. But anyway, you want to have green surroundings. The trees, if you're near trees that put off fragrance, pine trees, spruce trees, cedar trees, that's very healthy. The fresh air from those can help fight things like COVID even, and other diseases. They stimulate your immune system. They wake up your nerves. They're beneficial. Outdoors is also a good place to get sun exposure. Now look at this statistic. Regular sun exposure reduces the risk of Parkinson's by 98%. And you're thinking, it must be the vitamin D. Well, the vitamin D is certainly helpful, and especially if you get it from the sun. Actually, vitamin D supplement hasn't been shown to be helpful for Parkinson's, whereas real sunlight has been. And why is that? Well, it's probably not the vitamin D. And here's the thing. When you get direct sunlight on your head, the sunlight penetrates up to 8 centimeters or 3.5 inches. If you feel the warmth, you're getting this effect. And what it is, it's the infrared from the sun, not the ultraviolet that's responsible for vitamin D. The infrared actually stimulates your mitochondria within your cells to make melatonin. And so when the sun hits your head, it's been shown to bounce off all those gyri in your brain. You know those things that make your brain look like a walnut? Or a walnut look like your brain? And those bouncing around of those infrared rays make it so you get a lot of antioxidant, melatonin, just from the sun. Voila! No wonder Parkinson's goes down with good sun exposure. So get outside, get some good sun, work your way up to it, and if you're fair-skinned, be careful. But even indirect sunlight under the trees has this infrared benefit. And so you can go out there and be in indirect or partial sunlight and get the effect as well. Just don't stay inside all the time. Exercise. People who exercise more have a reduced risk of Parkinson's. It has to do with the blood flow, it has to do with the outlook. You're less likely to be depressed when you're exercising. Exercise is one of the things that helps with the risk of depression. And so Parkinson's is reduced by 53% by exercising people. What kind of exercise do you like doing? Hopefully it's something that you can do outdoors. Now I want to mention a certain nutrient, a certain phytochemical, tryptophan, and foods high in tryptophan are foods you want to eat. These are going to help with the neurotransmitters. And so the following foods are good sources of tryptophan. Tofu. Well, isn't that from soybeans? Yeah, so soybeans are good too. Pumpkin seeds, gluten, sesame seeds, nuts, almonds, black walnuts. Black walnuts are especially good for the brain. I mean, I know they don't taste as good as your English walnuts, but they're definitely high in building blocks for neurotransmitters. Legumes, and we mentioned a few, fava beans. We mentioned the velvet beans. But there's also black-eyed peas and lima beans. Very good for the brain. What's not good, because they compete for absorption of tryptophan, are fish, milk, meat, even rice is questionable, especially, I would say white rice. And so eating good food is a blessing. And melatonin is high in oats, tomatoes, corn. It's increased by fasting, especially in the evening hours. What's that mean? Skipping supper. So 2-meal-a-day program is much better for these neurodegenerative diseases for this reason and others. Foods high in B6 like bell peppers, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds. These will all boost your melatonin. Wow. Other things you want for your melatonin is to make sure you're not getting bright lights in your eyes after sundown. Turn the lights down. Live by a lamp or a candle at night. I'll just, thinking about that. I live near a lady who is off-grid. She's way off-grid. I mean, she didn't even go high-tech off-grid. She just got oil lamps and candles, and it worked well. And she would just kind of go to bed early and get up with the sun and sleep like a log and happy. Then her friend said, we'll help her out. We'll make her high-tech. We'll make Grandma high-tech, and we're going to get her a solar panel and some LED lights. And they installed them, and boy, what a change. Turn on all the lights, and she's having a wonderful time, and it's light all the way, well, as long as I leave these lights on. And so she went to bed at 9 o'clock, turned off all the lights. She didn't sleep a wink that night. She didn't get any melatonin that night. These lights have a massive impact on you. The light at night wipes out your melatonin. Now, there's some good herbs. Ashwagandha, St. John's wort. Ashwagandha raises dopamine levels, and that's what the doctor pills are usually trying to do, that they'll give you if you have Parkinson's. And St. John wort it blocks the enzymes that break down dopamine, so it stays around longer. And so these are good herbs. I tend to suggest you make teas out of them rather than taking them as pills again. Now I want to talk about treatments, hydrotherapy treatments to the head that can be helpful. And that would be something that will stimulate circulation. Remember I showed you the picture of the brain, and there's some nuclei deep down in your brain that die, especially like the substantia nigra. And what you're wanting to do is to stimulate blood flow to that. So the hot and cold treatments to the head work like this. You have the patient lay down, and you put a hot pack over their forehead and a cold pack over the back of their head. They lay on it. And so as they're laying down on the cold pack, you have a hot pack on the front. Keep that for 3 minutes, and then after 3 minutes you switch them. Have them lift their head, take the cold pack out from underneath, put the hot pack back there, put the cold pack in front. And what you're doing is you're switching back and forth between hot and cold every 3 minutes. When you have the hot on the front, most of the blood flow is going to be coming up the carotid arteries. The predominant blood flow in the brain is going to be front to back. When you put the hot in the back and the cold in front, then you're shutting down the blood flow toward the front. You're opening up the vertebral arteries that feed your brain from the backside. And so the predominant blood flow is going to be back to front. And you're improving the blood flow in the brain. It's like watering your flowers. Like watering my flowers in my hotel room. You're getting the blood coming to the dried out, dying nuclei. And perfect health depends on perfect circulation. And then at the end, you take away the hot and just put cold for 1 minute where you last had hot. And this is very beneficial. Have the patient lay down for 20 minutes after that, just to gain all the benefits you can from the treatment. I suggest the Parkinson's patients keep a very tight schedule. If you go to my website, you can download the paper on Parkinson's with the schedule in there, or you can at least download it from a different handout called How Do I Apply Healthy Principles in My Daily Life. It's got this schedule, an empty one you can fill out too. But we say be very strict with your breakfast and lunch times, be very strict with your rising and going to bed times. And so, yeah, Parkinson's definitely is a disease that needs close attention, especially to your schedule. Now, what about the Parkinson's and religion? Do religious people get more Parkinson's or not? It's a fascinating study, Journal of Religious Health, that came out with this observation. Compared with participants in their study who considered religion very important in their lives, participants who considered religion not at all important in their lives, they had a 10-fold higher risk of developing Parkinson's. So, wow, what kind of religion would be good? Well, start asking God about that. Talk to Him about, what religion do you want me to get into? Usually we think of starting with the Bible and finding out things. So just start reading your Bible and see where it leads you. I mean, spirituality is a personal thing. And avoiding Parkinson's is a practical thing. So put the two together and do a practical spiritual thing, eh? All right, in summary, whole plant food diet is the name of the game if you're going to win against Parkinson's. And you want to detox. You don't want pesticides, heavy metals, and solvents around. You want to make sure your diet is pure. And incidentally, if you're eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, they are sort of a constant detox for you with their fiber and their phytochemicals. You want to exercise out in the sun and fresh air. This is key. Not indoors, not in a gym, outdoors. Take that treadmill out on the lawn. And you want to strengthen areas that you are challenged in. If you're having trouble getting started all the time, practice getting started. If you're having trouble with shaking and doing things, see if you can't figure out a way to do those things, and then keep practicing it until the shaking starts resolving under the good diet and so forth. Explore some natural remedies. We mentioned herbs, we mentioned hydrotherapy, and de-stress. Rest in God. Give Him that stress. That's really the only cure for the high stress that leads to Parkinson's. So if you would like to look up more on this, you can go to my website and Northern Lights Health Education. Look under presentation handouts, look under online videos and Zoom topics and other languages, and there's a lot of resources. We got the paper on Alzheimer's, and so this is another episode of Blueprint for Health and Healing, reversing disease from its foundation, winning over Parkinson's.